On a sandy beach on Canada's southern coast, a fragment of tattered rag caught the attention of a local inhabitant. On closer inspection, he saw what looked like a splintered coffin and human bone.
Was a person of short stature with very distinctive kind of curly, kinky hair.
The remains showed other intriguing traits, including what looked like a terrible injury.
One would assume that there would have been some pain involved just in a very quick death like that.
Who was this? What were they doing here? And why were they buried in a shallow seaside grave? And does the apparent severe injury to the arm point to a suspicious death? Experts have been called in to investigate this intriguing find.
Accident, drowning.
Accidental fall.
Yeah.
Accidentally shot.
Through detailed analysis, they are determined to uncover the mystery of how this body came to be buried on a beach in Newfoundland.
This person was not local. So what were they doing there?
Along the sandy shoreline of the Straits of Belle Isle lies the quiet fishing community of Lons-Olu. It was established in the early 18th century and flourished as one of the many little settlements along this coast that fished and traded in sea cod. It was here in the late 20th century that the remains of a mysterious burial were found emerging from the sand dunes. Historical archaeologist Dr. Jim Tuck from the Memorial University of Newfoundland was called in to coordinate the delicate removal of the remains.
In a sandbank next to the cemetery, which was eroding, we could see what looked like the foot of a coffin with some human bones eroding out of the bank. And so we just removed the nice soft sand from it and slid it onto a piece of plywood and gone.
Once the body was removed from its sandy grave, Jim was able to reach some initial conclusions. From the simple wooden coffin, shroud and clothing fragments, it was clear to the trained eye that this was not a recent grave.
We could see, as soon as we got it exposed, that it was indeed a human skeleton, probably sometime from the late 18th or early 19th century, and that it was a person of very short stature with very distinctive kind of curly, kinky hair.
Found with the skeleton were a number of grave goods, adding to the mystery of this burial. A pair of shoes had been placed either side of the skull. A full set of clothes, still in excellent condition, and some tools were strewn throughout the coffin. But it was the hair that would be the key piece of evidence. Dr. Sonia Jerkic is an osteologist based in Newfoundland across the strait from the find. She's helped solve modern murder cases for the Mounties and the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary. But she's been asked to investigate the intriguing case of this ancient body found on the beach. The first thing that strikes her is that the deceased was buried with clothing and other grave goods.
It looks really interesting because in addition to the coffin and the skeleton, they tell me that there are other pieces, possibly even clothing, that's been found on top of the skeleton. And this is not what you'd normally expect from a historic burial. So I'd really be curious to see what all of this might mean.
Sonia is determined to find out who this was, what they were doing here, and how they came to die in what could have been violent circumstances. What strikes her immediately is that the skull looks to have distinctive negroid features.
Some of the more notable features would be in the outline of the nasal opening, where your nose would have been. In people of African heritage, you're dealing with a much broader opening here relative to the length, and so quite a wide nasal opening, as compared to somebody of European heritage, where this nasal opening is much narrower. The bridge of the nose projects outward more, and it also tends to be narrower right where it meets the frontal bone or the rest of the skull.
This is a puzzle to the archaeologist, as the presence of a person of African descent in this time and place would have been extremely rare. Sonia has sent off the few strands of hair that were luckily preserved in the grave for analysis. This will confirm the individual's genetic background one way or the other. Meanwhile, she wants to conduct a thorough forensic analysis of the entire skeleton. Laying out the skeletal remains of the body in the correct anatomical position and undertaking a full forensic examination will begin to answer some important questions. A beautifully preserved skull like this can reveal vital clues about the sex and age, but also a whole lot more.
Much as a living face provides an identity and what you can learn about a person who is living, likewise we can find the same kinds of information in a skull from somebody who is deceased.
She begins looking at the skull to see if she can identify the sex of this person.
Overall, it's a relatively small skull, which you might expect if it were a female that it would be small.
Though at first glance the skull looks feminine, closer inspection tells Sonia a different story.
In spite of the size, when you start looking at some of the other areas, the muscle attachment behind the ear here, which is quite pronounced, and the mandible too, you can see the angle here at the back, and see how that flares out?
Oh, okay.
And it just wings out almost, and you've got a muscle attaching there going up. So in terms of sex, just based on a cursory look, we could probably say that we're dealing with a male.
The sutures, the lines where different bones in the skull meet, aren't fused, telling Sonia that this was a young adult. The teeth will help her to assess his age more accurately.
We've got good indications of an adult because we've got the wisdom tooth, both sides, present in the lower jaw, likewise in the upper jaw. So we're dealing with an adult.
But not a mature adult. The dental eruption and attrition confirms the assessment made from the skull, that this man was in his early 20s. The good condition of the teeth also show that this was a pretty healthy person. Sonia now concentrates on the most disturbing feature of the skeleton. The lower left arm bones are missing. All that remains is a short stump. Although both feet were also missing, this can be explained by natural deterioration in the grave. But the arm tells a different story.
This bone is usually paired up with another bone in your forearm. And what one would normally expect to find is either a portion or a complete paired bone that belongs to the forearm as well. But here, all we have left is a stub of one of the bones, the ulna, and the hand is totally lacking.
Sonia is confident that erosion and decomposition alone cannot explain these missing bones. But what could explain the loss of this limb?
This is a real puzzle to me, whether it was accident or design that might have caused what can only have been an injury. And it's making me think about what may have ultimately played a part in how this individual died.
So had the arm been surgically amputated, or had it been torn off in an accident, or even hacked off in a fight? A high-powered microscope could provide some answers. The tip of the bone had undergone some erosion while in the ground, but there is enough detail left to convince Sonia that surgical amputation is out of the question. Sonia now knows that the limb was severed either by accident or violence. Such an injury would surely have been fatal. Although she has been able to work out the likely cause of death of this otherwise fit and healthy individual, Sonia is still none the wiser about who this man was and how he came to be buried on a windswept beach in southern Canada. Results of the analysis on the hair are back, confirming the archaeologist's initial hunch that this was a person of African descent.
I was hesitating to say that specifically from the features on the skull because it would be very unusual to find someone of black ancestry buried in Newfoundland. When we find any burials, any skeletons from Newfoundland or Labrador, they will generally either be First Nations, Aboriginal peoples who were here when Europeans first arrived, or they will be people of European ancestry.
No other skeletons of people of African descent have been discovered within the province. Historically, this part of the Americas was not an area where slaves were held. Neither was this a place of choice for black immigration or settlement after the American Civil War. So the isolated burial of this young African descendant here in Labrador is a puzzle.
The idea that one would find a skeleton in southern Labrador of someone with black ancestry would have been very unusual. But this is somebody who is of black ancestry. And what were they doing there?
Careful study of his clothing and grave goods may help Sonia determine why this man of African heritage was here and how he met an early and seemingly violent death. The mystery of a young man buried on the southern Canadian coast during the early 19th century is being investigated by archaeologist Dr. Sonia Jerking. What's strange about this case is that he was a man of African descent, a very rare occurrence at this time in this place. Also, his left arm had been violently wrenched off. Sonia's next line of inquiry brings her to the clothing and tools found in the coffin, such as a short-pointed wooden stake and a knife. Lining the clothes up beside the skeleton is a clear demonstration that they must have fitted and therefore belonged to the deceased. Conservator Kathy Mateus has painstakingly restored and studied the clothes in the hope that she will be able to give Sonia some answers as to the young man's identity.
And we're going to move the sleeves and put them in place.
Sonia is hoping that
Just hold
Kathy
that
will be
for a
able to identify exactly when this man lived and died.
So hey, we have a few things that we can use to figure out who this person was, and we'll start sort of with the textiles.
She starts by looking at his jacket.
If we start with the double-breasted feature of the jacket and the fact that there's a button front or a support which is added because there would be several buttons lining both sides. And if you fold this flat back, you can see the cut of it is sort of what they referred to as an M cut. And so you're really getting a little bit of style to the jacket. There's no side piece here. It's one cut right around, and then you have a little back piece at the back.
So nothing like a gusset or whatever in
No
there.
gusset there yet. So that keeps it early in the 19th century.
So, this young man met his end around 200 years ago. The design of the trousers, broad, fall-fronted, suggests a date of pre-1830. Kathy knows that he wouldn't have lived before the 19th century, as one of the great innovations of menswear in the 19th century was the introduction of trousers. The costume tells Kathy that this was a working man, and she thinks she can identify his area of work.
I think this costume must belong to a sailor of some description.
A fisherman? Navy?
Well, given that they were in the harbor of Lancelot, which certainly until recent times was very, very rich for codfish, probably more of a merchant ship.
The costume also indicates the young man's rank on board ship.
Within that period, this would lean more towards a working person's costume, not really a high status.
It wasn't uncommon for African men to work on ships, and he was the right age for a seafarer at this time. The presence in the coffin of the wooden stake, a marlin spike used by ordinary seamen to untangle and unknot ropes, seems to confirm the theory that he was low-ranking. However, forensic analysis contradicts this conclusion. His bones suggest that he was not involved in strenuous physical activity, nor did he suffer the poor diet endured by ordinary sailors. The jacket buttons also point to a higher rank.
You can see they're brass with a little bit of silver plate on them. And actually, the Earth Science Department here did some analysis for us, and we do know that is silver on them. So slightly high-class buttons, which you may not have expected from possibly a sailor.
So the buttons indicate that he held a higher rank than an ordinary seaman. If he had worked on a naval ship, he may have been an officer's servant who could afford silver buttons and who enjoyed a better diet and less strenuous work than the ordinary sailors. But the shoes found in the grave provide another tantalizing clue to his identity.
And this leather shoe is also well preserved. And if you look at the back, you can see this W carved into it.
In a time when such objects would be valuable, this would be an obvious way of claiming ownership. Another item found in the coffin bore a similar identifying mark.
This is his pocket knife, and look at what is carved onto the handle.
There's another W there.
There is, and what do you think? It could be an H.
Oh, wow, like initials.
That's right.
Would you go back to the shoe?
That's right.
So, whoever this man was seemed to have the initial W, probably WH. Given the fact that his shoes and clothes would have been useful items for his surviving shipmates, it's a mystery as to why they were buried with this man. Sonia has built up a picture of how this man lived, and possibly how he met his death.
So I know we have a young male who was a sailor. Somewhere along the line, this fellow lost his arm. He may have lost an arm in conflict aboard ship or in an accident. And if you think aboard ship, you might have lost it in the rigging. Ropes can get tangled up. You can get your arm tangled up in that, and it can just be literally cut off. After that, you could bleed out, what they would say today, and just loss of blood would have made you so weak that you would die very quickly.
What is still puzzling Sonia is why he was buried on land, as she knows that the tradition among mariners was a sea burial. Returning to the university, she meets Kathy to search through the Maritime History Archive. They're hoping that they might be able to find the young man's identity and discover a reason for his burial on land. The archive is a record of maritime activities in the North Atlantic since the 15th century. Included are accidents and deaths. They're hoping to find a record of W.H.'s death.
They don't fit.
They begin by looking for surnames beginning with H, and then for forenames beginning with W. Having no success through the names, they then focus on records of accidents or deaths that may make a reference to an arm injury.
Accident.
Drowning.
Lung fever.
Lung fever. Drowning.
Drowning.
Yeah, a lot of drowning.
Accidental fall.
Yeah.
So far, none of the accidents seem to say anything about losing a limb, a hand, anything along those lines.
No.
Accidentally shot.
Yeah.
No.
But no, there's another accident. Drown.
Mostly drowning.
Type.
Unfortunately, again, this doesn't throw up any obvious leads, but it does reveal something pertinent to the case. Contrary to Sonia's assumption, it was actually quite common for sailors to be buried on dry land.
You do see that they're not buried at sea. They're brought to land.
Brought to land. So WH may not have been as unusual as I thought.
No, I think that was more typical.
I spend too much time in the movies, I think. Jeez.
The one thing that is still puzzling Sonia is why W.H. was buried with his clothes and tools. It was usual practice to auction off a sailor's personal items among his comrades. His workmates could then make use of his things, while his family was able to make use of the money raised. Kathy suggests that maybe the rest of the crew thought his clothing was unclean in some way.
But you know, the fact that the textiles show so little wear and they were kind of thrown in, don't you think that sort of makes you think that there was some sort of disease and maybe they wanted him off that ship fast?
That's a good alternate explanation, but since I deal with the bones, I've got to go with what I see on the skeleton, and I have to keep coming back to that left arm that isn't there. if that happened around the time of death...
Sonia is convinced that huge blood loss or infection caused by such a terrible injury must have been the cause of death, rather than disease. Sonia thinks it's more likely that he was buried with his belongings out of respect.
You know, looking over these slides again, it just becomes more and more obvious that some people, somebody took an awful lot of time and energy to bury this fellow.
For Sonia, her investigation is almost over. But finally, she wants to get the opinion of Jim Tuck, the man who led the original dig.
I'm hoping Jim might be able to give me some clues about what life might have been like in the Strait of Belle Isle for a black sailor, and how he might have ended up dying and being buried in that desolate place.
Sonia reveals the new evidence she's gleaned concerning this intriguing burial.
Kathy and I have come up with some good stuff. I've been looking over the skeleton, and we've determined that...
But she'd now like to know what life was like for W.H. before he met his end.
I guess by our standards, life aboard any sailing vessel at that time was probably not a stroll in the park. Life was pretty tough, but in any case, I would guess that black seamen were probably not very high up in the hierarchy of things.
This sailor must have had a hard life. Could this have contributed to the loss of his arm and ultimately his premature death? Jim seems to think that this might well be the case.
Well, I suppose a fall from the rigging could have done it, or been tangled up in an anchor chain, or some sort of explosion if there were powder aboard. Maybe he was bit by a bear. There certainly were white bears around there at that time, so it could be almost anything. And unless there's some evidence on the bone, I think, again, it's just pure speculation.
Without that crucial piece of evidence, we may never know precisely how W.H. lost his arm. But one thing is certain, that he received a respectful, even honored burial with all his belongings. For Sonia, the accidental discovery of an ancient grave has given her a valuable glimpse into the life and times of a sailor, a man of African descent, from about 200 years ago. She is now able to draw some conclusions about who this man was, and how easily a young life could be brought to a premature end on board a working ship.
Starting from a few bits of coffin crumbling out of a sandbank in Labrador, I now know that a young black seaman was sailing around Newfoundland. One day, he lost his arm. He may have died immediately. He may have taken a few days to succumb. His mates gathered his gear together, fashioned a coffin, took him ashore, and buried him in a grave in Lansalou, and sailed away, leaving behind the remains of a young man whose family may never have known how he died or where he was finally laid to rest.